All right, Jose, welcome to Political Hope.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be on.
I mean, it's kind of a tough question asking, what does political hope mean to you? Because you have a different lens of politics. But if we were to lean into the asset framing of it, what does political hope mean to you?
Political hope, I think political hope is people like Martin Luther King Jr. I think it's people like Malcolm X. It's people who take a stand against tyranny and fascism. And it's also often done by people who think they aren't worthy either. I know Martin Luther King Jr. in like the early 50s, late 40s was really wrestling with this idea of like, am I really worthy of doing this? Should I really be the leader of the movement? You know, it's not all roses and rainbows. It's really not, when you decide to do something potent and decide to be in a position of authority or leadership. And I think political hope for me is people who, despite their flaws, despite their imperfections, despite everything that's wrong about them, they decide they're going to do something greater for humanity because that's what hope is.
I love that. What's interesting about that, as you're sharing both MLK and Malcolm X, and obviously I come from the Sikh community, which has a rich history of, pushing against tyranny, right? And it's funny because you never think about politics being the people pushing against the current state of politics. But when you mentioned those people, they were like actually challenging the current states of politics towards a new politic, advocating for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder too, even as you're doing this, one of the things I love about what you're running for Congress is that, yeah, what is the language here that is on your website? It's courageously intervening at an event. I love that language. But yeah, I mean, like there you are. Here you are. You're challenging the current states of politics, but now you're leaning in to jump into the politics and bring it in. So, like, what's your intention? Like, what is that transition? Actually, yeah, first more, how did that transition happen where you're like challenging and then being like, maybe I need to go into it?
It was definitely something I racked my head around. I mean, I remember a lot of people were asking me to run and whether or not I should run because of the interventions process, right? Also because I live in the poorest congressional district in the country, which is currently colonized by this guy named Richie Torres. Um, yeah,
What's the district?
New York 15th, the Bronx. So yeah. Rep 15, Bronx district. It is the poorest congressional district in the country. This is just like absolutely true. It's objective. You can look it up. It's really, really bad. And Richie Torres, my opponent, is this total APAC shill who takes copious amounts of money from the Israeli lobby. And rather than doing anything for his constituents, decides he's going to listen to a foreign country instead. And I keep saying that if he wants to run for the Knesset, I don't know what Israel's laws are, but he should go do that instead. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to see the statistics here too that 50 there's has the highest percentage of Puerto Ricans
Yes,
in
that's
New
right.
York. Wait, are you Puerto Rican?
No, I'm Salvadorian actually.
Salvadorian. But still, like, the Puerto Ricans, there's a culture out you would think of like, hey, wait, we want more liberty and more, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And like this guy has weaponized his Afro-Latino identity
Mm.
that's what initially helped get him in to begin with. And then he just totally betrayed the people. So,
And so he doesn't have I don't think he had anybody running against him, right? So you being pushed into it was like, hey, let me like at least challenge him in some way.
yeah. So what happened was, um, I thought somebody was going to challenge him in the Democratic primary because this district is considered a safe blue district, which
Okay.
means that like people will always vote Democrat.
Okay.
So the understanding is that if you want power, you have to go through the primaries
Okay.
rather than the general elections, right? And so what that means is I thought somebody's gonna primary this guy, right? Because he's an asshole. No, none of the constituency likes him here. But no, nobody. I heard rumors that one person was going to do it, and she was asking around some of the people that I know here if they would endorse her. I would have supported her too. But then all I heard was that this person got a comfy job working at a bureaucrat's office and was told to delete like all her social media posts about it, and she locked her Twitter. So,
Wow.
kind of crazy. So instead, I said, okay, well, if no one's challenging him in the primary, and I would never run under the two-party system. I abhor the two-party system with a passion. So I said, okay, I'll be an independent.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Seems like that's there's a wave. I mean, if you look at the statistics, I think most Americans are kind of leaning independent anyways.
I think so. I think there was a poll done that says that like 50 to 60% of Americans want something new or 50 to 60% of Americans think the two-party system has failed them. So,
Wow.
and there are parts in the country like North Carolina, I think, is home to the biggest independent people who are registered independent, with something like 67% of people who are
Wow.
registered independent. Yeah, but they still, but even the registered independents still occasionally vote one way or another.
Totally.
But
What's your
they're
guys?
also
I'm trying to I'm on the Ballotpedia. I'm trying to find out where what the percentage if you're voting, like how many people can vote in the district and how many do vote. Do you know?
from the numbers that we have, I think there are like about 650 to 700,000 eligible voters in my district. And in the last midterm election, so not one with
Mhm.
presidential, only like 90,000 people went to vote.
What?
Yeah. But in the last general election, I think 180,000 people came to vote.
I mean, that's
So
not that much. I mean, statistically, that's not good
that's
either,
one
you know?
third. That's like one third, if that. Yeah.
Wow. So curiously then in that front, yeah, what are you doing? I mean, obviously this is kind of building up. We got a month to go basically. How are you addressing those folks who like don't normally vote or feel like they're not heard?
Well, tomorrow makes 3 weeks, so I guess that should give people an indication of when this was recorded. So
Yes.
tomorrow makes 3 weeks until the day in which people go vote. I mean, it's our first time running, and but somehow I've been blessed to have an office, and somehow I've been blessed to have the recognition I have nationally and internationally as well. And what I'm focused on right now, first and foremost, is stopping war, stopping
Mhm,
nuclear war.
mhm,
And there's a misconception that people have who don't live in the Bronx, who say, well, the people in the Bronx only care about where they're going to get their next meal from or where they're going to get their next rent check from.
mhm,
I think
mhm,
it's absolutely disgusting to assume that people in the Bronx who are poor are animals and are incapable of empathy and thinking. And so people tell me, well, you should, stop focusing on the genocide and focusing on war and focus on the needs of your community. First of all, I do focus on the needs of my community. If we want to actually rebuild and repair the Bronx, it requires a shift away from a war economy, which is what we have, to a productive economy. And it's going to start in the Bronx, where we're going to start by rebuilding the Bronx, and the Bronx will lead the way forward. The
mhm,
Bronx is going to be, if we do things right, and we actually shift away from a war economy, which is possible, we have what it'll do is that the Bronx will become the center for leading innovation and scientific development. That is how we fix the Bronx. That is how you fix the standard of living here. It has to be a top-down approach. You can't do bottom-up approach. It's very noble what people do, but I think it's a damn shame that people have to line up on food pantries. I walk around the Bronx in the morning, there are lines and scores of people who rely on food pantries to make a living or to live. It's horrible. And then Richie Torres says, I got more food pantries, more funding. Well, why are people having to stand in food pantries to begin with? Why aren't we talking about that instead? So that's the thing that really just like annoys me about people who don't know anything about the Bronx. And so what we're doing in relation to like, well, what are we doing to get the vote out? Well, rather than going to the places that we know are going to vote, so like the rich part, Riverdale, this district is a tale of two cities. There's the top, the north. So up there in the little gray area, that's Riverdale. That's also one of the richest zip codes in the
What?
country. Yeah, yeah. So if that little section at the top left there wasn't there, the so 35% of people, I think that's right. I know a third of people in the district live underneath the poverty line, and that's all centered in the South, right at the bottom
Mhm.
of the South Bronx, right? And the only reason that number is not higher is because of that top left part there, Riverdale. And Jonathan Greenblatt, I think, owns a house there of the ADL. So yeah, I know it's pretty insane. Um, and if that little part up there wasn't there, I think that 30% number would be much higher. I think it'd be like 50, 60% of people in the district would be reported to be living underneath the poverty line. And how far low? I mean, the poverty line is $34,000 in New York City. If you make at least $34,000 in New York City a year, you're considered at the line. The median income in the South Bronx is $24,000 a year.
Wow. Wow. And by the way, it's New York too. Just keep that in heart and mind. It's expensive already.
Yep. Yep, exactly. So,
Wow.
it's bad. It's really bad. And I think what we're doing is we go into this poor places of the South Bronx and we're just trying to instill hope into people. The biggest thing we run into is people who tell me, well, wait a minute, how do I know you're not going to be like everybody else? There's that general distrust because I think a lot of people have just given up on politics altogether. One of my favorite encounters I have is whenever we're tabling in the street and somebody comes up to us because of our signs or something, and they talk to me. They said, "Well, I wasn't going to vote at all this year because I'm not happy with any of the presidential candidates, but I'm going to go vote just for you." That really like that really inspires me.
Yeah.
So,
That's
yeah.
powerful. I mean, it also just shows how important it is to just be present, like physically present, be somebody who's like there to actually like listen and to just be present, like to be a like literally a body and a mind to like be present and people are seeking that.
Absolutely.
We I last week I hosted a candidate forum here in our in I'm in California and it was really cool. Invited like people running for supervisor, people for running for Congress, people running for whatever council members. But I made it a circle. Like I
Mm.
like forced everybody to get into a circle, and the candidates were like, "What? Where do we go?" Like they were so not used to not having a podium and standing in front of everybody. And it was like just goes to show how we're just like lacking that basic thing of having everybody sit together and in
Mm.
community rather than like people being above people because they're running for something, you know?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder too. I wonder how, like, what about the youth? Like, what are you noticing out there in the Bronx? Because I actually used to teach in New York and I would teach up in the Bronx. And I actually remember teaching a few schools up there. And there it was so awesome because there was such a rich culture, right? Like such amazing, awesome culture. How are the young adults showing up, like the Gen Zers, millennials? Are they paying attention to you? Or yeah.
That's kind of like where we get our in terms of like, I run into the Gen Z people a lot, the 18 to 22 demographic, 18 to 24 demographic. They almost never vote in this district, according to the statistics. They just don't. They're not really engaged politically. But in my opinion, I'm more trying to, the way I'm operating this campaign is what is it that I could be doing right now if I were elected, but that I
Mhm,
could be doing right now?
mhm,
Why do I have to wait to be elected to do some of the things that
mhm,
I'm doing? I'm interested in making sure that a young person here in the Bronx gets an education. And we have classes that we do every week here. We go out in the streets and we just do impromptu, platonic dialogues. We just go out and we just annoy people in the streets by asking them questions about things they think they know. And that's our goal is to go and get those young people and say, like, I want you to wake up. I want you to be part of this process that is called living because it's a social process. It's not just, yes, we are individuals, we have our own minds and we have our own thoughts, but we don't exist in a bubble. We exist in a society amongst other people. And our action or inaction is what's allowing our government to continue to send money and weapons over to a foreign country to keep slaughtering innocent people.
mhm,
So, are you prepared to take a stand against that and define the future how you think it should be defined?
mhm,
And that's our goal with the young people. So, we do have some young people who come around who work and volunteer with our campaign. And we're just trying to find more of them. We're not like any other campaign. We don't do the typical internship thing we actually try to just engage them, turn them into leaders as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's cute. That's really important because it allows there to be kind of like a mutual aid. Like as you're explaining that, it's almost like really important to kind of create bring it back to even Malcolm X, right? Like creating a sphere of mutual aid and support for each other. And then that's a part of it too. I mean, I also noticed it's important to create a space for 18, 24-year-olds to not just be angry, to turn their anger into something, into action. Otherwise, it can become really toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Because there are people who feel extremely passionate about what's going on and they don't know what to do, and I think that's what is so important and potent about our campaign is that we give people a vehicle to do something.
That's powerful. And I also want to I pinned it earlier because you mentioned it. I'm a big proponent that if you can take the hardest space, like the hardest situation and show that you can regenerate it, that can become a template for others. I mean, that in many eco restorations or farming, right? Like if you want to do regenerative farming or eco restoration, if you could do it in the desert, I mean, you could take that principle now anywhere, right? And what you're sharing about Bronx, I mean, that's kind of makes me think about that how it's one of the poorest districts in the country. Yet, if that can be elevated, how can that be an example for the rest of the world? And also, you're right. I mean, I think something you mentioned in one of your other interviews was when maybe you can say it properly, but when our foreign aid informs our local aid. What was that? How we spend?
Oh, I was saying that our foreign policy is our domestic policy.
Yeah.
Because people like to say, well, what's your domestic policy like? It's like, no, my domestic policy is foreign policy. Because here in the United States, that is what we're doing to other countries is what we've been doing here for the last 50 to 60 years. I call the Bronx Gaza West because what we've seen in an accelerated rate with Gaza, just the ultimate destruction, turning it into rubble, has been the same process happening here in the Bronx, just very slowly over the last 50 years. I mean, the Bronx not only is it the poorest congressional district in the country, it's also the unhealthiest congressional district in the country. A lot of diseases get spread here. People are completely unhealthy, obese, diabetes, the works. It's all here. I mean, people have just been completely abandoned here. And, you have to ask yourself, well, then how are people actually making a living? And you realize it's like, you know, it's not good.
If you could imagine what would be like from your perspective, since you lived there and I imagine you grew up there, what would be a transition to something like some sort of local economy or local, what would it be? Like what would be healthy? And
So yeah, you have to, well, first of all, it's a good question because I have this plan called the Space Civilian Construction Corps, and here's what I mean by that. You have to take the generation of people who are 18 to 26 years old, and you have to say to them, look, we know there's no future anymore. The Bronx is collapsing, the country is collapsing, there is no proper infrastructure here. I mean, there is no cross Bronx train. There's only up down trains in the Bronx,
yeah,
but there's
right.
no trains that can take you across. So people have to fit like sardines into these buses. They might have to wait 2 or 3 bus loads before they can actually get in. It's absolutely horrible. And we say to them, you are going to be responsible for building them. We are going to pay you to get the training to be an engineer, to be a carpenter, to be a machinist, to be a welder, whatever you need to be in order to rebuild your community. And what you will realize is that you will realize just how out of shape the 18 to 26-year-olds are. You will realize what kind of mental health problems they're going through. You're going to realize what kind of other health issues they may have. And so you cannot have a healthy workforce. You cannot have a proper workforce if they are unhealthy, both
Mhm,
physically and mentally.
mhm,
Mental health is a big, big issue nowadays. And I think it's related to our culture.
mhm,
So what does that mean? That means you have to do things that are required to make sure your society can continue to be healthy in every way possible. So you get these kids in these work camps and you say, okay, listen, we're gonna make sure you get your dental right, you're gonna get your health
mhm,
care right. There's a therapist you can talk to. We're going to really figure you out. And, we're not helping you just for your own self-improvement. No, you are going to work on yourself so you can be at the position you need to go and rebuild your community, rebuild your neighborhood. That is why it's important that you stay healthy, both mentally and physically, so that you can then be the best version of yourself to go and help others who need it, right? And then you also realize how uneducated people may be, right? How many people, I think only here in New York City, like 50% of people don't pass the English Regents exam, which means they don't have basic literacy. And these are like high school kids. It's
Oh.
really bad. So that means you have to give them an education too. It's all centered around this program. Okay, we want to rebuild the Bronx and we want the 18 to 26-year-olds to do it. They have no education, they have no skills, they are completely unhealthy, they are going crazy, some of them.
Mhm.
So what we're saying is we need to fix all that
Mhm.
in one new civilian construction corps. And the space element of it is that they should be trained to the point that they could be a STEM engineer at NASA. Like that's how good they can be. That they can build stuff that will be launched into space. And some of them probably will end up working at NASA, creating advanced aeronautic components or parts or discovering something new that will be useful and helpful here in the United States. That is development. That is living, exercising your creative muscle. That is a local economy right there.
Mhm.
That is what my domestic policy is completely reinventing the wheel when it comes to how we structure our society and how people see themselves in their lives.
I love that because it also kind of creates like this minor league, major league thing, right? Like the minor league is like developing the skills and the team in the Bronx, and then whoever kind of like is able to shine from there is able to move on to work at NASA or whatever else or wherever they can thrive beyond just the Bronx. And they can always come back because they were helping to make it. I think there's a little bit of ownership there, right? Too. I think there's when you talk about mental health, when you actually contribute to the betterment of your community the implications of your mental and spiritual, physical health is like off the charts. But right now, people don't feel like that agency or ownership, and that creates even more disconnection and mental illness, actually. So it solves many problems.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And this would be in coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers
Mm.
as well as retired union leaders, because that I think is what a country should do. I
Mhm.
think that's what a military should do, first of all, not to go be sent to kill people. It shouldn't be sent to go and be a bully around the world. You have an army as your first line of defense for the United States, and you look at what happened in North Carolina, where people don't have they have no access to the roads anymore. They have no access to no access to the roads, no access to water. A lot of places still don't have power. Certain highways aren't going to be rebuilt until 2025, right? And where's the National Guard? They're in Kuwait. The National Guard's in Kuwait for some reason when they should be here rebuilding stuff, helping people, rescuing people. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
I think yeah.
I think, and you hit on something interesting because even like two things. One, this project is not even dependent on you being in Congress or not. It can become a local movement regardless of that, right? I mean, there's ways to make that kind of move. And then the other side of it is kind of imagining what would it take for us to actually start to get the military demilitarize around the world and bring back, by the way, like all my friends who are in the military, they're not happy leaving the country. They want to contribute. There is actually also a feeling within the military as well, where they want to be able to contribute back home. How could we create, like, is there any, I'm just totally being civic imagination right now. Like, how can we create a movement to demilitarize, but at the same time be able to put that money somewhere because they're not going to just like not use that money, you know?
Well, I think you have to first of all you have to like rethink what a military is. I think that's the first part. There were inspirational speeches done by people like Kennedy who said that when he wants people around the world to think of the US Army, he doesn't want them to think about a bad guy with a gun, but a man with a blanket and a hug. It's
Wow.
like, well, wait a minute, think about that for a second, right? Like, how can we create an army that does that? That has that as its principle, as its core, that it's coming around the world to actually help you, not to put a boot on your neck and tell you what to do. And I think if we start from that standpoint, that a military, of course, should be first to, yeah, should you have defense? Of course, I guess, that's like, but also, we live in a world now where a lot of other countries, except Israel, are not trying to actively start war. I mean, we keep pushing the bear with Russia, we keep pushing the bear with China, we keep spreading all these lies and propaganda with them saying, well, they're the enemy, and that's why we need to have, $1 trillion defense budget. I think one of my favorite ideas is by Helga Zeppler-Rouge, where she has this thing called turn swords into plowshares. So the
Mm.
swords into plowshares idea is a Bible idea, right? Where it's a quote that said like, "Let us turn our swords into plowshares." I don't remember the full quote, but there's like you take a sword, right? So if you think about it, if you think about the imagery, there's a sword. You have to beat it so that it becomes a plowshare, so that you can, you know, um,
Right.
grow crops. Now, think about it this way. We have all of these companies that um we have all of these companies that are like Raytheon or Lockheed
Mhm.
Martin, and then you have all of this industry that is meant to make, there you go. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Then they will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. So the equivalent of our swords and our swords today are these factories
Mm.
that produce all these jets, bombs, missiles, the ball bearings that are needed in all these planes and stuff. What if we said, hey, you know what? We're going to reindustrialize you so that instead of producing that, you're producing stuff that we need, like
Mhm.
high-speed rail, which is not only economical but green, like it's so that people can get from New York to Chicago in like 3.5 hours without having to pay an expensive ticket, plane ticket, right? Like you're going to produce the steel and the magnetic levitated rails that's needed. You are going to produce the tools that are needed. You are going to create new kinds of advanced forms of energy that we need. So rather than producing jets that kill people, you're going to make stuff that helps people live, that can help sustain life. You're going to build the material we need for new housing, for efficient housing. You are going to build the material we need to make sure that nobody has to go hungry again, that
Mhm.
nobody has to go unhoused or unclothed again. And so $1 trillion defense budget, can you keep it? Only if it gets reoriented into what I just said. If those factories, if you're pumping $1 trillion into building stuff people need to sustain life, then yeah, you can keep $1 trillion budget, and it's only used to make people's lives better. So,
Yeah, and that
yeah.
$1 trillion is going to be go a long ways when you start to put it back towards the people. And mind you, keep in mind we have a lot of farming to do here in our like regenerating our farming industries. That in itself
Yeah.
is a big deal.
Corporate farmers have like stolen the local family farms. I got to spend some time out in South Dakota, and I really learned the importance of, you know, the family farmer.
Mhm.
And I really got to understand what it means to have a local farm. Now farmers who still do own their own farms, they have to do like 3, 4 times the normal yield just to stay afloat at this
Yeah,
point, or else they have to get bought out by a corporate farmer.
yeah,
It's horrible.
it's
And
terrible.
I think we definitely do need to, well, that's the other thing too. Like these industries should be researching how do we grow more food,
Mhm.
in places that like how do we turn a desert green?
Mhm.
How do we
Mhm.
how do we bring vegetation and life to a desert? Because it can be done.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, like, oh, how do we create more tools and advancements so that we can continue to grow stuff in places that normally wouldn't want to? Um, yeah.
This is an organization in India that turns deserts into forests. And they've been
Wow.
going for like 20 years now. And they like literally have completely transformed places all across India. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow.
And so it's very possible. It's a matter of the willpower. And I think this is like why I'm really grateful that you hopped on this conversation because I feel that because of it's almost like you got some training going, intervening at these places and challenging people to their faces. It makes me feel like that's the kind of willpower we need to get us through the liminal space. Because there's like a little bit of we got to midwife the situation right now because it's like we're kind of stuck, and it's like, but we can't just have people who are just a status quo going into political positions. We actually need people who are going to kind of have a lot more willpower. And so I'm curious, like how do you couple of questions on this one. Like, how do you cultivate your own willpower, right? And then how can others cultivate a similar kind of willpower? Because in a way, what you're talking about is political willpower. So yeah, like both questions.
Well, just on like the interventions, first of all, there's an expectation right now that everybody has to do something they wouldn't normally do. When you go to an event, right? So I interrupt events. That's what I do sometimes. There's a speaker and you're an audience member, and there's an expectation that's there. The audience member is supposed to listen and the speaker is supposed to speak.
Mhm, mhm.
We have to break that norm now because if the person who's up on stage is a so-called authority who is trying to tell you something that is wrong and a lie, it is your job to denounce him
Mhm.
and to tell him he is wrong and to burst the bubble. There's this fable, the king has no clothes, this one,
Yeah,
right? So it's like it's your like so Paul Krugman, the last intervention I did you see this where I stood
it's
up
so
and I
great.
said
So great.
he was doing this panel called Perceptions on the Economy and its impact on the elections. And he was trying to say, well, the economy is great right now. I don't know why people think it's not. And so I just stood up and I said, uh-oh, Nobel laureate.
I love that.
But like the economy's not good.
No.
There are places here in the Bronx that are collapsing, but the economy's good right now. Asheville, North Carolina, there's not going to reopen a highway till 2025. Oh, but sure, the economy's going great. So you have to denounce people. Another expectation that has to be broken was Liam Cosgrove did this great thing against Matt Miller. Maybe you saw this.
Oh, what's
Uh,
that?
so this gray zone journalist named Liam Cosgrove, he was in the briefing room with Matthew Miller. Matt Miller is like one of these like totally insane assholes. Matt Miller recently said, maybe you'll recognize this. He said, no, no, no. We never want a ceasefire deal with Hamas. We are committed to the total destruction of Hamas. And then in the same sentence said, we don't know why Hamas won't come to the table.
Wow.
So, this is like a State Department guy. So Liam Cosgrove is going on this. He's talking like, so look, we're on the verge of nuclear war right now. We're all basically about to die. And then Matt Miller cuts him off. He's like, if you want to make a speech, there's other places in DC to make a speech. If you have a policy question, he says, and then Liam Cosgrove just says, people are sick and tired of the bullshit, you know?
No.
And uh, that went viral. Just him saying that alone. He's a journalist. You're not supposed to, inject your own personal stuff as a journalist, but Liam felt compelled to say something because he's right there in front of Matt Miller. And, he has to speak for the people. He has the opportunity to speak to the State Department spokesperson and express how people feel. So I'm saying people have to go out of their normal ways now and do stuff nonviolently that they otherwise normally wouldn't do or want to do. I think that's why I keep emphasizing the interventions
Yeah.
process. People have to stand up and speak, and they have to do it in a way in which it like expresses and underscores the urgency of it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've experimented with similar interventions, but my interventions are more Socratic and waiting for the question and answer sections, of things.
No,
And
that's totally valid. That is totally valid. I don't want you to think that you have to do it the way I do it because I have done them Socratically. I have done them, and like I want to make this clear. Standing up and shouting should only be the last resort. If you know there's no Q&A, that's why you have to do that. If there is a Q&A, then you can do it at the microphone. But if there's a Q&A where they say you have to write your question on a card, that's not a Q&A. That is not a Q&A.
no,
So,
no, it's
yeah.
not.
So anyway, but on this Socratic intervention thing, and I did not mean to cut you off. I
No, no,
apologize.
please, please. No, no, I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
On the Socratic intervention, my friends and I went to a Bronx Unity Democrats meeting recently. We did not go there with the intention to make it hostile. it became hostile, and I will explain why. So they brought this woman in. Her name was Nye Whitaker. She worked on the Obama campaign and the Biden campaign and the
Mm,
Hillary
mm,
campaign.
mm.
And she was just there to whip the vote. She was talking very fast and she said, "Okay, we're going to take a busload of you guys and we're going to take you into Pennsylvania. You're going to go here. You're going to go here. You got to get out the vote, get out the vote, get out the vote. Don't talk to people about why they should vote. Just tell them, go vote for Kamala. That's what you got to do."
Oh my God.
And I simply asked the question, um, how do I tell people who don't feel comfortable voting for Kamala Harris that she was endorsed by Dick Cheney? Because
Yeah.
some of the people in this room were protesting Dick Cheney 10 years ago. All of a sudden, she's like, time out. I'm not here to answer those questions. Time out. And so I stood up and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I think this is a legitimate question. There are people who do not feel comfortable, and teachers was like, "You're being really disrespectful to people right now in the room. There's an immunocompromised person there. There's people who got out of work, and you're taking over this meeting." And I was like, "You know what? I wasn't planning on it, but now I will. Like, what are you crazy? You're gonna really tell people here they should vote for the woman who says we need the most lethal army in the world?" And now here's the crazy thing. Like people in the room started denouncing me and shouting at me, even though it was friendly in the beginning because I introduced myself as a candidate running against Richie Torres, who they
Right.
all say they hate and who they all say they're against genocide.
Mm.
But then I suddenly I say, hey, maybe we should consider our putting our support behind Kamala Harris, which I am not a Kamala Harris fan at all.
I would never would
And
have guessed.
yeah. And so they basically just kicked me out of the room. And I said, okay. And one of their
But
people came out to talk.
this is a unity gathering.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, they are Democrats, but anyway, like, they want to put their support behind Kamala Harris despite the fact that she's supporting a genocide. I don't know how the hell they could do that. But so I said to them, uh, but then one of their people came out and talked to me afterwards. He was like very emotional. He's like, you could have been talking to a fan. I've seen your posters everywhere, and like I've seen you canvassing on X road, on that road, and like it's just and I can't believe you came. And if you were, maybe if it was a different day, we could have had. Like he was just really emotional because I had challenged them on something they knew was right, which was like, hey, you can't
Mhm.
support Kamala. A few days later, I got an email from some of the people who were in that meeting who said to me, "Thank you for bringing up what you said about Kamala and the most lethal army in the world." She said that a lot of the people in that room were on on um on the night that Kamala Harris accepted the nomination, they had a watch party.
Mm.
And when she ended her speech by saying, "And America will continue to have the most lethal army in the world," the same thing I brought up in the room, she said to me that all of the members had their mouths wide open, agape, and said, "What the heck did she just say?" And none of them were happy with that statement. And the fact that I brought it back up in the room, like I said the thing you're not supposed to say.
Whoa.
And so it allowed them to all have a dialogue about it. And yeah.
But it wasn't comfortable for you. And it wasn't a comfortable it wasn't like, oh, you got hugs and like everybody because like here's cupcakes and everything.
No, and that's the thing. That's the other thing I want to tell people too. It's like, be okay with making people uncomfortable. Because if you and this is also good for your personal life too.
Mhm.
Sometimes there are situations where somebody will do something to you and you can let it go. Maybe life will be better that way. But if somebody is doing something that bothers you, it is okay to tell them, hey, that bothers me and that makes me not comfortable. And by you telling that to that person, they may not know it's making you uncomfortable. So, it'll make them uncomfortable, be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And it is always better to make people uncomfortable if it's for the right reason. So they think about it.
Right,
They can actually change it and do something because or if people know they are doing something they shouldn't be doing and are choosing to hide it
right.
and no one says anything about it, they will keep doing it.
I'll keep doing it.
If you blow it up in their face
Yep,
and you just say like, I know you're hiding something, I know you are lying to yourself,
yep.
then it's like, oh, they can't hide anymore.
Hard. Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So you have to put a crisis in their mind. That's the only way you
Mm.
can change somebody. Um, yeah.
I love that too. And it also reminds me that we're kind of dealing with I feel like we're in a pandemic of bullies, and the bullies have kind of gotten a little bit extra all over the country and the world. Like the bullies are kind of like empowered, like from the
Yeah.
pandemic to the war. I mean, this political stuff, there's like this weird, there's like a celebration of the bully. And so for us, like what you're saying, and to call people out and to call them out on their BS, call them out on their abuse, call them out on their manipulation of other people. I think it's a duty actually against.
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's a moral duty, and we all have to be responsible for each other. I really live by the John Donne poem, um oh, I just had it in my mind too. No man is an island. Do you know this one?
I know this one. I love this. Hmm.
Yeah, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Oh, there you go. You got it pulled up. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like I am part of mankind. Everybody's decision affects me. And if I see somebody who's doing something wrong and I know they're wrong, I have to speak up and tell them. And that's also like what that's very much on my mind. I was in tears when I saw the images of people in northern Gaza who were getting like just exterminated, and they were on fire and they were immolated. And I don't know how any person can just continue to live a normal life and not say something about this,
Hmm.
knowing that's what's going on. And so and as we get closer to the election, it's just so disgusting. And I know it's a weird thing for me to say as a congressional candidate, but the elections process is just so disgusting that there are people who would tell me, well, Kamala Harris is going to be the lesser evil of Trump. Really? The stuff we see happening now is happening now.
It's now.
The
It's happening
genocide,
right now.
right? Yeah, the genocide under Trump is theoretical. It may come, sure, but this is happening right now. I mean, why aren't more prominent Democrats withholding their support, withholding their vote, and saying, you know what, I won't endorse you or support you until you give it on this thing?
Yeah.
But they won't do that,
Mhm.
you know.
I mean, it
And
also you kind of it alludes to a spiritual crisis of sorts. I can't help it. I mean, I'm a very spiritual person, even though when I go into places, schools and stuff, they're like, "Sir, can you not be spiritual here?" And I'm like, "What? How do you not be spiritual in a space anywhere when you're spiritual?" But in this spiritual crisis, for me, spirituality is coming to some feeling of interconnectedness. Like when you're like when you like that poem you read, right? Like when we're connected to everything, any suffering anywhere is our suffering. And if it's happening unnecessarily, that's also our unnecessary suffering. And so it's how can you not intervene? How can you not stop it? But if you don't feel you're connected to everything, then you see how this abuse can become actually perpetual.
yeah, exactly. That's right. And if you only speak up for yourself or your community, you're forgetting that there are, I do believe we are one species. I don't think that the suffering of one person is any more or less important than another. And I think that, I got into it with the Zionists. I was in front of the United Nations giving out a leaflet, and some rabid Zionists came out and was like just really giving me shit for supporting Hamas. And I said, okay, if there was a school shooter in a school of 250 students, would you say it's okay to blow up the entire school to get rid of the terrorists? And he said, well, if it's in Gaza, yeah. So what? And I said, do you have kids? Like, no, not in my school, not my kid's school, but Gaza's different. So what, we're just gonna let the terrorists live? It's like, yeah, I guess, what, we succeed in blowing up 250 students.
It's a they, it's a them, and it's a them. It's a them. It's not us.
Yeah. So, I was just entirely like blown away that somebody could actually think that somebody's life is worth less just because of where they happen to be born.
It's yeah. I mean, it's clearly what like when you share a story like that. And I've heard some crazy stuff too the past year or so. It's I mean I've been in these battles for a long time, so I've heard some really just like really disturbing things sometimes from people, and it almost feels like the more powerful people are, the more wealth they have. It's like there's even more of a disconnection of like reality, you know, of how people connect and why we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. People are just like so caught up in their own. And the other thing is there are billions of dollars spent by our government and the Israeli government to make sure that people think this way and they don't actually know what's going on. In Teaneck, New Jersey, it's a very Jewish area. If you look at their newspaper, the coverage is always about the hostages, the hostages, the hostages, the hostages.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then they might put in a little footnote, the latest death toll in Gaza is 40,000. But that's it. Like they make, a big point about emphasizing the hostages, which
Hmm.
look, I completely empathize. I understand people should not be held hostage. They should be released,
Hmm.
just like, Israel should stop bombing children and women.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was at this panel yesterday with these doctors, this guy, Dr. Mark Perlmutter, Dr. Feroz, this nurse Nana Plot, and I forget the name of the other doctor, um, who were in Gaza. And like one of the things that Mark or Dr. Perlmutter, excuse me, had said was, you a lot of the people would coming in, like he said, like 90%, 95% of his patients were children. And they were coming in with not one bullet wound, but two. And he said that not only were they getting shot, they were getting shot square in the heart and the head. Said, like
Targeting.
it's not an accident.
No.
You don't shoot lots of children in the
Mm-mm.
heart and the head on accident.
No.
And it's just the complete lack of humanity that is over there, that those IDF soldiers have just been brainwashed to think that people of Gaza and Palestine are cockroaches.
Yep. I mean, it's classic propaganda. I mean, know that it's become more and more sophisticated. It's not like propaganda's been around for thousands of years, but now it's just on hyperdrive, right? You can like really just manipulate people with propaganda so easily, which is why I feel I'm really grateful for you showing up in this way and being on the street because it's kind of hard to propagandize when you're like actually connecting with people heart to heart in person, having conversations. That's hard to interject, with media or content and also independent news, right? And even like this podcast, like just more creating those more independent spaces. We're not afraid to talk about what's nobody wants to talk about. I think that's really important. But also to talk about possibilities, like because I think that's a big part too. We can't just complain about the problem. What's the vision? What's the possibility? Where can we go? So on that front, a couple of last questions to close this interview out. But I hope this is not the last one. When you're in Congress and when you're doing the next move, hope you come back on and share some more aspects and perspectives. But what what's the most optimum? Like, let's just lean into like the most protopian perspective. Like, let's say you get elected and you're in office, and it's about a year and a half from now. What is happening in your world, your sphere of influence? What's happening in Gaza, maybe? What's happening all around? Like, what's the best possible thing that could happen if things line up?
It's a good question because I don't like to lie to people. I can't just wave my hands and make everything better. Being a congressperson, I would only be one out of 435. There's a lot of congress people out there. And I would only be one vote. But what I can promise people is that there will be a voice in the United States Congress, a voice that they know they can trust, a voice that will speak up for them and not be afraid to say the things that other people might be afraid to say. I've got no problem going into the congressional floor and just exposing all of the donors of the people who are there. Like this guy, Dan Crenshaw, who wanted to lead the movement to shut down TikTok to be like, yeah, hey, so why did you get all these donations from Meta and from these other social media companies that are rivaling TikTok right now? Are we sure it's not the Chinese that are spying, but the fact that your donors want that gone? And besides, you know what, Mark? You know what, Dan? I'm glad you brought up surveillance and spying,
Mhm.
right? Because why does our government spy on us? Is it okay for our own government to spy on us, but not the so-called Chinese government? spy on us? Do the American people deserve that right to know that, we're spying on them? Are you allowed to look through all the naughty stuff, Dan? Is
Mm-hmm.
that what you want to do? And
What
you don't
about
want
your
the,
naughty stuff?
yeah, right. So, that is my optimum, but also making sure that we continue to build a movement while I'm in Congress. Being the thing that AOC lied to people that she
Mhm.
was. This idea that she's going to be fighting for people in the Congress while also building this stuff in the street and being that voice. She's a total fraud and a sellout.
Mhm.
And then making sure that other independent voices can get in the Congress. If we get one person in the Congress who's an independent, that's it. We can do it anywhere. We can do it here. It's like what they say. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. If you can do it in the Bronx, you could do it anywhere. We're gonna break the dam open,
Yeah,
and we're
because
gonna make
we're gonna make some plays out of that. Definitely some musicals are gonna come out of that for sure.
so, you know, yeah. Um, but yeah, that's my optimum. Making sure other people can get in, making sure I'm always speaking up for truth, and making sure that people actually feel represented and heard.
Nice. Yeah. And it'll be important to have a curly hair in Congress too. Gotta
Yeah,
represent the curly hair, okay?
that's right. That's right. Yes.
There's not that much curly hair in Congress or beards. Have you noticed
Oh
that?
yeah.
There's not
I
beards.
yeah, I think only Jamal Bowman recently grew one out, but also he doesn't care anymore because he lost. So he knows he's out of a job in January.
Yeah. How do we not have beards? Beards is like such an important thing. I don't know.
I'm
Don't get me
I'm
started.
bringing in the beard representation. Don't worry.
The bearded midwives.
Yeah.
And then how about you, man? Like what's the most protopian thing happening for you? Like just personally even, like what would give you what would help create more, I don't know, like contentment for you also in your personal life or just your life, your what you're seeking to gain out of life.
I have tied everything I do to my personal life, and I honestly feel glad that anytime I do an interview, I don't have to put on a face. That
Nice.
I can just be who I am and what I am. And so this is what I am, and I am content. I'm content in the struggle. And it's an easy thing to say, but whenever it's really, really bad, I am not having a good time. Okay, this has been a most stressful journey of my life. I quit my job at the coffee shop to do this full time.
Wow.
And then I found out you can only pay yourself whatever I reported in taxes last year, which was about $20,000. So I've only been living off $400 a week. I've got tapped out credit cards, like three of them. So I've got credit card debt up my butt. I can't really afford to pay rent, and I'm happy. I'm happy. It's not a feeling. I'm happy because I can at least look myself in the mirror and I know I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that somebody else can have a better future than I can.
Yeah,
And that to me is happiness and contentment. And, I trust that God will hopefully provide for me in the way I need to be provided for. And He hasn't failed me so far. And I do my best to keep my faith in Him always. So,
that's
yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, and that's powerful conviction. That kind of faith can move mountains. Um, Especially
Yeah.
if you're showing up with integrity. So thanks for doing that. Who knows? I mean, I personally, if you had a Substack or and you like recorded audio or videos on there, I would pay for that. So I'm sure a lot of people would really find a lot of value from your perspective and also what you're going to do in the Bronx, what's going to happen and how that can also be a template for other communities around the
Yeah,
country.
absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for this interview.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you. You feel complete? Anything else you want to share or anything or any called? I'm going to put this up pretty soon too. So any call to actions or anything?
We have an event October 26th in New York City. If you want to get the tickets for that, it's vegasarepeacefund.org. Just like that, Vega Sare, SARE, peacefund.org. It's a joint event between myself and Diane Sayre. We're going to have Scott Ritter, Larry Wilkerson, Jimmy Dore, the guys from Due Dissidents on. It's going to be a big event. It's an indoor rally with classical music mixed in. So definitely check it out.
Awesome. That's kind of things we need more of, actually, just get celebrations while we're asking for liberation, and demanding it.
Absolutely.
So cool, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Jose.
I appreciate
Good
you.
luck. Sending you flow, man, for the rest of the process.
Thank you.